Well, welcome everyone. We're excited to have our first event of the semester tonight. It's going to be a talk on how to create a sustainable policy towards Israel from the United States perspective. We have two fantastic speakers tonight. One is a professor at AU, another a professor at Johns Hopkins. They're both more than qualified, and I'll go through their qualifications in a second, to speak on this pressing issue. Obviously, with Israeli elections recently happening and the Trump peace plan being proposed recently, this is a very relevant issue, and that's why we've decided to bring it up tonight. We also have Juliana Pilon, who's our faculty advisor, who's graciously agreed to be our moderator tonight, but we will also be taking questions from the audience about halfway through, and we look forward to your participation. It always makes our events a lot more fulfilling for everyone. So to introduce Professor Stephen David, he's a professor of international relations at Johns Hopkins. His work focuses on security studies and specifically the politics of the developing world, American foreign policy, and turmoil in the Middle East. Professor David's scholarship emphasizes the impact of internal politics on foreign policy, particularly among developing countries. Professor David has introduced a unique theory of omnibalancing, which asserted that to understand the foreign policies of developing countries, it is necessary not only to consider existential threats to the state, but also internal challenges to regime survival. And this is one of the theories we look forward to him speaking about tonight to us. Dr. Boaz Atzili is a political scientist who teaches here at American University. His interest is in international security with an emphasis on the politics of border and territoriality, deterrence of non-state actors and their host states, and the international aspects of state weakness. His research interests are international security with an emphasis on territorial conflicts, the politics of borders, military doctrine, and the international aspects of state weakness and state failure. He's published multiple articles in venues included in international security, security studies, studies in conflict and terrorism, governance, among other issues. And then our moderator tonight is Juliana Pilon, as mentioned before. She's served as an adjunct at Johns Hopkins University, AU, George Washington University, and St. Mary's College of Maryland, among others. She's also taught at the National Defense University. She's currently a senior fellow at the Alexander Hamilton Institute for the Study of Western Civilization. Professor Pilon has served as a senior policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation in Washington. She also joined the International Foundation for Election Systems from 1992 to 2002, and she is a well-published author with books ranging from authoritarianism to election systems. So we clearly have a qualified panel here to speak on the issue, a qualified moderator, and we're hoping for a great event. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Professor Pilon to get the event started.
Qualification was that I'm very fierce, and so I can moderate these very fierce gentlemen. As a matter of fact, I will simply turn to Professor David, who will go first. Yes?
Whatever you want.
Okay.
You're fierce.
I am fierce. Well, for moderation, but I'm also very polite. So, Professor David, the floor is yours, and as I understand it, the format would be that you each speak for about 10 minutes, and then perhaps, depending on whether you find disagreements in what, or perhaps not disagreements, that you take exception or you wish to add to what the previous speaker spoke, we can go back for 5 more minutes each. And then I'll ask a couple of questions, but of course the floor has to be the students. In certain respects, they are your co-panelists, except for the fact that the idea is for them to ask questions rather than make statements. But that depends. Sometimes that doesn't happen quite that way. So Professor David, you're first.
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me at American University. It's my first time, and we had a delicious dinner with Chef and it's great to just see a touch of your campus, and you students here, so thanks very much for having me. 10 minutes. Let me talk about a subject that's very important to me, and that is the future of Israel's existence as a Jewish democracy. I mean, Israel is one of the only countries in the world whose existence is routinely called into question. For other countries in the world, France, America, China, they do something you don't like, you say, well, we don't like what you did. With Israel, it acts in a certain way, you say, well, we don't like what you did, and you have no right to exist. And this is alarming, because I'm a Zionist in the sense that I believe that the world is a better place if it has room for a Jewish democracy, such as Israel. And I worry about that ending. When I think of the threats to Israel, there are both threats that come from the outside and threats that come from the inside. From the outside, what's reassuring is, for the first time in much of Israel's history, it does not have to worry much about being conquered by its neighbors. I mean, I'm older than all of you. I remember the 1967 war, the 1973 war, when Israel's fate hung in the balance, when the fear that the Arab states would be able to conquer, overwhelm Israel with all kinds of terrible things that would ensue. That's not going to happen. There's no combination of Arab countries, along with Iran, that have the ability to conquer Israel. First, Israel is friendly now with certain Arab states, also unprecedented. It has peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan, closer relations now with Saudi Arabia, which when I was growing up would be unthinkable, the United Arab Emirates. The Soviet Union, which played such an important role in arming the Arab countries, is no more. And there's also a recognition by Israel's enemies that if they were to get lucky and were to mount an attack that looked like it would be successful, they would be destroyed in return, because they know that Israel has nuclear weapons. We believe Israel has at least 80 nuclear weapons, enough to destroy any combination of countries that would go after it. But the good nuclear weapons also bring bad. I think the most pressing existential threat to Israel from the outside comes from Iran. If Iran were to develop nuclear weapons, Israel's fate would be very much in doubt. I don't believe that the kind of deterrence that existed during the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union would be replicated with Israel and Iran. And maybe in the question and answer session or whatever, we can get into the details why I don't think Iran, one can be confident it can be deterred. So it's a mixed bag on the outside. No conventional conquest, but the specter of a nuclear threat hanging in the future. In some ways, I worry more about the internal threats to Israel as a Jewish democracy than the external ones. Some of this has to do with my work, which focuses a lot on domestic politics, but also on what's going on in Israel. Israel prides itself on being both Jewish and democratic. And my worry is that as long as Israel continues the occupation in the West Bank, also called Judea and Samaria, its identity as a Jewish democracy is in danger. One can play around with numbers, how many Arabs there are, how many Jews there are, whatever. Nevertheless, if you add up the number of Palestinians in the West Bank with the number of Israeli Palestinians, it's close to half, maybe more than half, or soon will be more than half. And this presents Israel with a dilemma so long as the occupation continues. If you've got a majority or near majority of Arab countries in your state, how can you call yourself a Jewish democracy? Talked a bit about this at dinner. If you give the Arabs in Israel the right to vote, which a democratic state must do, should do, they're going to vote in an Arab government and Israel ceases to be a Jewish state. If you don't give them the right to vote, well, then how can you call yourself a democracy when half or more of the citizens are not given the basic right to vote? So either you cease being a Jewish state or cease being a democracy. And my concern is that events are moving in that direction. In 1980, 13 years after the 67 war, there were roughly 15,000 Jews in the West Bank. 15, 1-5. Now, well over 400,000. I'm not counting East Jerusalem, which I don't consider so, but over 400,000 in the West Bank. It's becoming increasingly difficult to conceive of a Palestinian state as more and more land is being gobbled up by these settlements. And again, I'm speaking as someone who is very much a supporter of Israel and wants it to survive and thrive. But one of the main components of Israel's survival, in my view, is American support. And while there are many components to American support, I think the most important is the sense that we have common values. That we in America look upon Israel as a country that's like us, that it's a democracy, it's a nation of immigrants, struggling to survive in a tough neighborhood. We see in Israel a reflection of who we are. But if over time this commonality of values is undermined by the poisonous effects of a persistent occupation, I suspect American support will be undermined as well. You're already seeing the Democratic Party much lessening of support for Israel. Last public opinion polls I saw, well less than half of people identified as Democrats said they supported Israel. But you're also seeing it among young people and people of color, the future of America. Young people of color especially, are saying they don't support Israel. They don't see it as a country worthy of our support. And you also see it among young American Jews, who you would think would be the bastions for it. What I'm seeing, at least at Johns Hopkins, is sometimes hostility among young American Jews, but somewhat even worse, indifference. That they don't want to be part of what's going on in Israel. So yeah, Israel is a nice country, kind of like New Zealand or Belgium, but not a country to which they have a special tie. And as this persists, I think the linkages that put America in Israel's corner, which has been so critical for Israel, militarily, strategically, diplomatically, are going to be eroded. And this is going to not bode well for Israel's future. But let me stop there.
That's good.
Is that 10 minutes-ish? Okay.
Would you like to address that issue?
So a lot of things that Mr. Davis says, I agree with. So let me just add a couple of things. So first, to the external threats, and by the way, I also remember the 67 war. I was 2 weeks old. But in a way, it's interesting because that I was born in a town called Ashkelon, and my parents were living, well, still live now, in a small kibbutz. You guys know what kibbutz is? So in a kibbutz that is very close to the Gaza Strip. And at the time, Gaza Strip was controlled by Egypt, and everybody were completely sure, also everybody were sure that the war is coming, and the feeling was that Egypt's going to kind of run down, like run through the south of Israel, maybe get to Tel Aviv. There was a real fear about that. And when my mom brought me back home from the hospital, we went straight to the bomb shelter and not home. So that was a real kind of threat, and Israel really does not face this kind of threat. So when we think about the external threat, I see there are two kinds of threats. There are the sort of like low-level threat from non-state actors, from terrorists, whatever you want to call them, and that comes from the Gaza Strip, from the West Bank, from Lebanon, from Syria. But that's really a low-level threat. It can hurt and it can kill people, though the numbers are not that great, even with all this kind of exchange of fire with Gaza. Again, my parents are very close to the borders, and it's not fun living in this kind of arena. But if you think about it, it's not an existential threat. Even if you think about a potential conflagration with Hezbollah in the north, which is much more formidable power, it's still not an existential threat to Israel. And so I agree with Professor David that the only real existential threat to Israel at this time is Iran, and only if Iran gets nuclear weapons, because conventional, in terms of conventional weapons, Israel is the strongest power in the Middle East, by far, really. So in my mind, the only potential existential threat to Israel externally comes from Iranian potential nuclear weapons. And in that sense, I think that the best chance of preventing this kind of future happening was with the nuclear agreement with Iran that the Obama administration signed, and that the Trump administration withdrew from, which I think was a big mistake. We're not completely clear that Iran will now go and develop nuclear weapons, but we do know they're enriching much more nuclear material now than they did before, and so they have the potential to do so. But I also agree with Professor David that a lot of the real threats to the future of Israel is kind of more internally, and has to do with the potential, with the occupation of the West Bank and the potential annexation of West Bank. So what I would want to kind of address briefly is the recent peace agreement, peace deal that Trump suggested, kind of declared for Israel. I don't really see it as a peace deal. It's a, if you will, it's a peace between Trump and Netanyahu. Not there was no part for the other side, Palestinians, in these negotiations. It was a negotiation with the Trump administration and the Netanyahu government, and it's basically abandoning the traditional role of the U.S. as a mediator between Israel and the Palestinian, and U.S. was never like a balanced mediator. It's always basically on the side of Israel, but we know that the advantage of mediators that are clearly on the side of one of the powers is that they can bring that power to the table. And in this case, the Trump administration completely abandoned this role and basically said, okay, we go with whatever Israel wants. In the agreement itself, I was planning to bring them up, but I forgot to bring the computer. But the agreement itself basically, sort of like symbolic. So if my work is done, Okay. If you think about the West Bank as the main place that where they agree about, and that's where the plan calls for the establishment of a Palestinian state. But this Palestinian state is going to be really not one state, but a bunch of bifurcated pieces of small territories that are crisscrossed by roads that are controlled by Israel, leading to every small Israeli settlement in the West Bank. So that creates really a situation in which if it's a state, it's not a state that one can govern in a really real way. It also creates a situation, it creates borders that are really not defensible. If there's going to be any spoilers, any people that wants to attack, that don't agree with the peace agreement and want to attack it, they have a tremendous opportunity to do that in a situation where your borders are like that, right? And there will be many spoilers from both sides of the conflict. So I think what it could create, and that's kind of like the vision of our government basically, is a state, a Palestinian state that is officially a state, but in practice it's completely controlled, under Israeli control, and it's something that, unfortunately, in my mind, it looks very much like, or even worse, apartheid South Africa, which is, I think, a serious threat not only for the Palestinians, of course, but also to the democratic nature of Israel. It's sort of like a way to square the circle and keep on controlling the area permanently without allowing the Palestinian vote in the Israeli Knesset, which again, yes, will create a situation where it's no longer existing. I think I'll stop here.
Well, there's considerably more agreement than I had anticipated. So perhaps I could, rather than moderate, since there's no real need for moderation after all, perhaps I could ask a couple of questions, and you could address those, and then we can open. For example, specifically, the question of occupation. Of course, not everyone uses that particular term, although it is very common. Would it not be helpful to explain in what circumstances preceded the current situation, given that in 1967 Israel was attacked, and it was in defense of its borders and its existence that Israel pushed back. And then, as has happened all over the world, when you've been attacked and you have been successful enough to push back the attackers, the previous situation is no longer in effect because it has been violated. So there is that aspect. It's not as if Israel went to occupy a previously existing state that was just, they were just doing their thing, and suddenly these Nazi-style occupiers come in. So the question, perhaps you could defend, if that's the word, the use of the term occupation, which, as I said, is of course quite common. So that's one question perhaps for you. And for you, Professor, I have another question, and that is with regard to the Iran agreement, Mr. Obama's agreement Iran. In what way do you get the sense that that agreement assured that Iran was not going to get the nuclear bomb? And those two questions are enough for now.
It's funny when you talk about the Middle East, especially if, I don't know, you're sort of like me, you're kind of, I think, somewhat reasonable person, you always get attacked or criticized from different flanks. You get attacked from the right, you get attacked from the left. I spend a lot of time trying to justify in the academic environment why I believe Israel has the right to exist as a Jewish state. Believe me, in the academic world, that's not taken for granted. But then you also get criticized for pushing back on why I consider what's going on in the West Bank an occupation and why it should end, at least it should mostly end. But to get to the word occupation, first, I'm not an international lawyer, but a couple of things. One, in '67, just to be technically accurate, Israel was not attacked. It believed it was going to be attacked, had good reason to believe, and there was a blockade put on the Straits of Tiran. But Israel fired the first shot. This is not to say it wasn't justified, I think it was, but we should be clear about that. So what was going on in the West Bank? The West Bank was was taken by Jordan in 1948. It was to be a Palestinian state. When the UN created Israel in 1947, created a Jewish state, people forget that, it created an Arab state, a Palestinian state. Jordan took over the West Bank, and from 1948 to 67, the West Bank was part of Jordan. It was not internationally recognized as such. I think only 2 countries did so. But nevertheless, de facto, Jordan exercised control over this territory, which was pretty much entirely made up of Arab citizens. Now, when Israel took this land in 1967, one could perhaps justify in a war of self-defense, pushing out the Arab armies and establishing some control of this land. And if the Israelis had put military bases in the West Bank and basically said, we're going to preserve our security until a Palestinian leadership emerges that we can negotiate with, that's certainly something I could live with. But instead, they settled the West Bank. Partially for religious reasons, partially over time, Israelis went there because they were getting subsidies on mortgages, cheaper housing, and there's some argument for security reasons. And maybe you could make the case that security reasons are the most compelling, but if I want to be protected, I'd much rather be protected by the Israeli military than my kindergarten, which is what you have now. Now, why do I call it an occupation? Because the Palestinians live under the sufferings of the Israeli military. Now, there are divisions within the West Bank, and we'll get into the technicalities. Parts of the West Bank are totally under Israeli control, parts under Palestinian control, and parts are mixed. But the basic fact is that the Palestinians do not have a country of their own and have to answer to the Israeli military. That, to me, is an occupation. I might add, in terms of international law, an occupying force is not permitted to establish civilian settlements in the land that it took. Now, there's some fancy schmancy international legal arguments that the West Bank was technically not part of Jordan because it wasn't recognized as such, but that fails the common sense test. The fact of the matter is, it was an Arab territory, the Israelis took over, and now it's being populated by Jewish settlements. That, to me, over the long term, is untenable.
So I first want to address that a little bit also. And I agree that this is occupation. By any international law standard, this is occupation, and I also agree that Israel attacked first in 1967 in what it saw as a preemptive attack against Egypt first. There is a disagreement among historians to what extent Egypt was indeed about to attack Israel, and but kind of reasonable that it would. But historically, yes, I think you're right that there was if you are attacked and you are responding to that, occupying land, historically that is a justifiable reason for taking territory. I would go further and say that historically, in many cases, the states that wanted to that went to war, even if they are not attacked first, and occupied this territory, they get to occupy to hold the territory and annex it. Just think about all these places that we call California and New Mexico and Arizona, etc. That was part of Mexico, and we won in a war against them and took this territory. However, I think that is a kind of rule of the game that is no longer valid in the world today. And can argue about where exactly is the line that's crossing, but I actually wrote a book about this. This is a concept that most people call the norm of territorial integrity. I kind of think that this is not a very good term because it's kind of too broad, and in my book I call it norm of border fixity. Basically the idea that borders should be fixed in principle, and that is the norm since, I wouldn't say since exactly World War II, after World War II, but definitely since the 1950s. There are very few cases of states that actually conquer and annex territories, and if they do, there's almost universal non-recognition of this annexation. In some cases, like the case of Iraqi annexation of Kuwait, there's an international action and that kind of negates this action. In other cases, like this Russian occupation of kind of annexation of Crimea, there's no action like that because, well, Russia has nuclear weapons and they are very strong military, but there is strong sanctions against it, and very few countries, basically Russian puppets, that are recognizing this annexation. So I think it's not, in that sense, unique that other countries don't accept Israel holding of this territory as legitimate. Okay, now to the question of Iran. So I think that the agreement, the Iran nuclear deal was definitely not ideal, and it did not really address a lot of issues with the aggressive action of Iran, but it did address this nuclear the issue of nuclear, of development of nuclear weapons, and it had within it built-in international inspection mechanism for this, which worked until the U.S. withdrew from the deal, and we have the evidence that it worked. Interestingly, actually, the majority of the Israeli security establishment, the Mossad and the command of the IDF, whereas many of them opposed the deal at the beginning, they also, once it was in effect, they said that we should not break the deal, and that they advised against breaking the deal, because it actually worked in that sense. It did not stop Iran from intervening in Syria and supporting Hezbollah, etc. But it kind of prevented the most important action, in my opinion, of creating a nuclear Iran, which is the only potential existential threat.
If I could just add to that, I think unfortunately we agree here, Mr. Atzili, with the Iran deal. I mean, the Iran deal was not perfect, but what it did, it put important constraints on Iran developing nuclear weapons for at least the next 10 to 15 years. And it's not everything, and after this 10 to 15 year period, presumably it would be free to move on with nuclear weapons. But in 15 years, a lot can happen in the Middle East. You could have a different government. The Iranian people tend to be somewhat moderate, pro-Western. Maybe they get a government reflective of their views. And it's certainly true that the Iran deal did not curb Iranian aggression in the Middle East. But if you look at the nuclear deals that America and the Soviet Union signed during the Cold War, they focused specifically and only on nuclear weapons. It didn't say the Soviets could not invade Afghanistan or cause trouble in Africa or muck around Latin America. It simply focused on nuclear weapons. That's what the Iran deal did. I thought it did a reasonably good job of doing it. And I think the withdrawal of the deal was a big mistake. Because before this deal was concluded, the Israeli military had to every day ask themselves, do we attack Iran, which would be an enormously difficult way to go? Or do we let them get the means to destroy us? With the Iran deal, that was taken off the agenda. You knew you had good confidence that Iran was far away from developing a nuclear weapon. Now, as Professor Atzili mentions, Iran is breaking out of the constraints of the deal. It's enriching uranium to the extent to which they're getting much closer to a bomb. And the question that the Israeli military, and to a certain extent the American military, have to ask themselves, how far do you let them go before you launch what could be a disastrous military strike? That's a scary thing.
Okay, let's open it to questions from the audience. Daniel?
A lot of scholars today are calling for a European exit of Jewry. And I know there's an increasing wave of immigration.
Just a little louder.
A lot of scholars are calling for a European exodus of Jewry. And there's a lot today I see among historians of whether Israel is incentivizing immigration to Spain or not, or what is the role. I guess in your opinions, how does all this anti-Semitism in Europe that is translating to immigration will affect the geopolitical nature of the conflict? How the U.S.
Well, look, anti-Semitism is growing in Europe. I mean, there's no question about that. There's both anecdotal and statistical evidence that Jews cannot where keep yarmulkes or Jewish stars without being taxed in many European countries. Emigration has increased from some European countries, France especially. But the sad fact is there aren't enough Jews left in Europe to dramatically alter the population dynamics in Israel. The last large Jewish community in the world is America. And the emigration of American Jews to Israel remains very modest. It's typically a couple of thousand a year. Many of them return to America. Many of them are Orthodox. So the notion that you're going to have a demographic transformation because of large-scale emigration from Europe, I don't think, sadly, the numbers are.
I would just add quickly that I'm not sure that large immigration at this point would do much for in terms of like balance of power, because it might actually make Israel weaker. Israel is a very small place, very crowded place. Already I would think overcrowded in terms of population. So and a sudden increase of the even Jewish population would have significant economic negative effects, I think, and would make life a bit harder for the people there. That housing prices are already rocketing, and people like young couples can afford to buy a house. So it's unclear, like, and in terms of like military power today is much more dependent on technology and highly sophisticated systems rather than on manpower.
Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Cameron Vega. I'm from Arizona State University. On the question of Lebanon, as we've seen with Iranian proxies, especially when regard to the attacks on Saudi oil fields, they're no longer a desperate flurry of coordinated rockets. They're precision guided. And Lebanon and Hezbollah have been stockpiling precision guided weapons from Iran in recent years, especially in recent months. At what point do you think the threat, especially on the Israeli border, becomes so severe that Israel will be forced to act, or will be forced to act at all? Especially since these are no longer a series of kibbutz. These are skyscrapers. These are buildings that took millions to renovate and build. A couple of rocket attacks would be devastating on stage.
Thank you. So the power of Hezbollah is, as I said, I think not an existential threat, but it was a significant threat to Israel. I don't think that there's a question that, like, in a straightforward clash between Israel and Hezbollah, Israel still significantly stronger. But as we saw in 2006, Hezbollah has the kind of like staying power to keep on firing and causing damage to Israel, even under Israeli sustained attack. In a sense, I think what we have in the northern border today is sort of like a mutual threat, mutual deterrence, if you will, between Israel and Hezbollah. And I think it's hard to kind of think about how it is, but in a sense, this deterrence, it's the fact that it's a mutual deterrence at this point holds it from deteriorating into war. So I think it would be a mistake for Israel to attack Lebanon and Hezbollah just because Hezbollah is amassing power there. it was kind of like committing a suicide for the fear of war. What I think is the greatest danger, and that's my recent book was basically about this concept called the triadic coercion, is that in Israel there's a significant, especially in the military and the security establishment, there's a significant, in my mind, misconception that the way to defeat Hezbollah is through attacking Lebanese infrastructure. It's through threatening and attacking Lebanese infrastructure. That's what the IDF wanted to do in 2006. It did it only partially because American pressure against it. But now they're saying that the mistake of 2006 was that Israel targeted much more Hezbollah rather than targeting Lebanon, which in my mind it's exactly the other way around. Targeting Hezbollah was actually very successful. In the first night of the war, the majority of the long-range Hezbollah missiles were destroyed, and that was the most important action of the IDF. Targeting Lebanon was a mistake, and it will be even more a mistake. So now, because even if the Lebanese government, such as it is, would realize that, okay, if we're not reining Hezbollah, Israel going to attack us, so that we should do that, they just don't have the power to do so. The Lebanese army is weaker than Hezbollah, and even if they want to, they just cannot control Hezbollah.
I would just add to that, that you bring up a very good point, that not only are they massing tens of thousands of missiles and rockets, but many of them now have guidance so that they can hit targets in Israel. And there are targets in Israel, the mononuclear reactor, which I think they should probably shut down. It's an old reactor, but as long as it's still hot, if you blow that up, it can spew radiation throughout part of Israel. You also point out there are desalinization plants, there are skyscrapers and such. Israel is not going to attack so long as they stockpile these weapons. It hasn't done so yet. But the hope is that deterrence here will work, that they will recognize that if they launch attacks, especially against critical facilities in Israel, that the response would be devastating, and therefore that will stay there. But the problem with this kind of deterrence, as with all kinds of deterrence, is that the decision whether or not to attack is on the other side's leadership. And you never can tell what pressures there might be to cause them to act in such a way. So deterrence is something, but it's not everything.
Thank you.
Let's see, we have three. Perhaps we could take two at a time. I think the two of you were before, and then you after that. So why don't you start? Yes, go ahead.
Hello. You know me. You don't. I'm an officer here. I'm curious, in what ways are Israel's democratic institutions working, and in which ways are they failing?
Okay, and you?
Yeah, I had actually a very similar question. So, based on the results of the election, the most recent election, which seems that the right-wing bloc has a majority of seats, but not enough for a coalition. Do you see Netanyahu being able to build a coalition? I know there's lots of talks amongst commentators of the right-wing bloc trying to find a member of Knesset to flip their allegiance and switch their seats. So, what's the possibility of that happening?
You know, since it is 1 minute to 8, I'll take the third one as well, and we'll end with that.
Okay, so mine is actually also about elections, but elections in Iran. So recently, within the last 2 weeks, we saw the parliamentary elections where the conservative hardliners, gained control. What do you think Israel's response will be to this new government in Iran?
Okay, there's a lot there. Forgive me if I forget some. With Iran, I mean, yes, things have gotten worse with the government in Iran, but it already openly called for the destruction of Israel. Relations were already quite terrible. So I don't see a major shift. What I do see as precipitating a change in Israeli policy, again, is if Iran continues to try and develop nuclear weapons. Then I think the Israelis are going to have a hard time restraining themselves. Even though an attack on Iranian nuclear facilities would be enormously difficult. I mean, the Israelis destroyed nuclear reactors or nuclear plants in 1981 in Iraq, in 2007 in Syria, but they were relatively easy targets. They were above ground, basically a single building. Iran has thousands of centrifuges hidden underground in many different sites, very far away. Iran could retaliate. You're not going to stop their ability to make them in the future. So it would be a horrible mess. But also it would be a mess for Israel to leave with Iran the ability to destroy Israel if they so chose. I suspect Israel would be right. Very quickly, the recent elections in Israel, Netanyahu did better than expected. I'm sure he is vigorously looking now to peel away a couple of people from other parties who have won to give himself a majority. He's scheduled to be tried, I think it's March 17th. One way he might be able to avoid that is to be a sitting prime minister. There are legal issues in Israel as to whether he can even form a government, given the fact that he's under indictment. So there's a lot of moving parts here. Even many Israelis are at loss to know how to predict what's going to happen. I suspect maybe the most likely outcome is that we're going to have Netanyahu around for a few more years, as he's able to form a government. And very quickly, in terms of democratic institutions, I hope strongly that Israeli institutions hold. Parenthetically, American institutions hold too, but that's all others. Look, Israel is a democracy. It has free and fair elections. It has a robust free press. It has an independent court system, freedom of religion, association. But all these institutions are under attack. And whether it's resilient enough, strong enough over time to maintain its democratic character is really an open question. I certainly hope it does, but there's certainly no guarantees.
Basically, I agree with everything. So for those of you who don't know, this was the third Israeli elections within a year, and all of them are kind of ended up with some kind of stalemate. This one with a bit more voices to the right wing. It's actually not quite right to say the right versus the left, because the party that kind of holds the balance between the Israel Beitenu, the Avigdor Lieberman, is also very much a right wing. It's the trick is that it's a militant secular party that doesn't want to sit together with the ultra-Orthodox parties that are other component of Netanyahu coalition. And also there's a significant personal animosity between Lieberman and Netanyahu. And I would say that even significant parts of the blue and white, the main opposition party now, are fairly much kind of right-wing in their ideology. Their main differentiation from the Likud is on issues of the rule of law and democracy, where there, I think there are different. So it is kind of, this kind of frequent elections and no real results is sort of like chipping in at the confidence in Israeli democracy. And the other thing that is doing that is that in this process of frequent elections, Benjamin Netanyahu becomes more and more extreme in inciting against Arab citizens of Israel. And that is, in my mind, a real threat, because if you suggest that, you can suggest that this is a democracy, but the Arab citizens and their elected officials are not legitimate politicians and not legitimate political forces in Israel. That's not the right thing to do in a democracy.
You may have noticed, though, in connection with an answer to me, that the mention of the fact that there are elected Arab officials in Israel, members of the Knesset, just a small detail, given that the Palestinians who have one part controlled by Hamas and the other by the Palestinian Authority make the gifts that Netanyahu has taken, has accepted from various people, as when compared to the millions that Mr. Abbas has been taking together with the Palestinian Authority, has been stealing from the rest of his people for years and years. The imbalance is considerable. I think this is a good time to end. I just want to, if I may, on a personal note, not a question of isms, it's just personally, I find it sad that it isn't, that not enough has been said about the fact that Israel has tried from the very beginning to live in peace with its Palestinian neighbors. To this day, the Palestinian spokesman, I don't think the Palestinian people are done justice by their spokesman, as one can see just by how the Palestinians talk and live when you talk to them one-on-one. But their leaders have not served them well. They have refused and continue to refuse to accept the existence of Israel. And so I am very pleased that we have had a conversation. I think that talking about Israel is terribly important. The Jewish people have suffered enormously. They've been thrown out of Arab lands as well as European and other lands. And I'm just sad that I think in our conversation we could have done a better job, that includes me, but I'm only a moderator and not a specialist, of presenting the full picture. Anyway, so on that note, I want to thank our speakers. Boaz was telling me that his grandfather, your grandmother, was it your grandmother who walked?
No.
It was your
the
grandfather.
Grandfather of my grandmother.
The grandfather of your grandmother
Yes.
walked from Europe to Israel. So
In the 19th century.
in the 19th century, what is it, Rick?
Care to give the spark notes on that?
The spark notes. Yeah, you have to tell them. That's the most amazing. I've never heard of anybody walking from Europe.
Yeah, I mean, it was different times.
Yes.
I believe, I don't know too many details. I believe he was, he just didn't have the money to travel by, probably by boat or something from to the Palestine, which was under the Ottoman Empire. So and he wanted to get to Jerusalem. He was an Orthodox religious Jew, and he decided to.
From which country?
From Hungary.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that was around what time? What years would it have been?
I think it's around the mid-90s.
Mid-19th century. Yeah, that's known as going home. All right, well, thank you so much.